At the corner of Fifth Avenue stood the neighborhood Walmart, where folks could find just about anything they needed. On this particular day, Officer Henry Winters of the Maplewood Police Department had just finished his patrol around the parking lot. It had been a long morning, and with the sun beating down, he decided to step inside to grab a bottle of water. As he strolled through the aisles, his gaze fell upon a woman standing near a shelf on the far side of the store. She was a black woman, dressed casually in a long dress, glancing over the items as if searching for something in particular. Henry narrowed his eyes, watching her with a certain intensity. Something about her made his instincts flare up. Years on the force had trained him to be suspicious, to spot trouble before it happened. And right now, his gut was telling him that something wasn't right. The woman, Nancy Westlake, had come to Walmart that day just to pick up a few things for her family. A quiet, hard-working woman, she was well respected in the town and rarely drew attention to herself. She hadn't thought to grab a shopping cart, figuring she was only picking up a couple of items. As she moved from one aisle to the next, Henry noticed she was holding a jar of peanut butter in her hand, but not placing it in a cart or basket. His suspicion deepened. Was she trying to steal? He'd seen this kind of thing before, people casually walking around, holding items as if they were just browsing, only to make a break for the exit. Without thinking twice, Henry stepped closer, his eyes locked onto her. The moment she picked up a loaf of bread, he decided it was time to intervene. "Ma'am," he said, his voice firm as he approached her. Nancy turned, surprised by his sudden presence. She saw the badge on his uniform, his stance rigid and accusatory. "Mind telling me what you're up to?" Henry asked, crossing his arms. Nancy blinked, momentarily confused. She glanced at the items in her hands, then back at him. "I'm just shopping," she replied, her voice calm but cautious. "Funny," Henry said, tilting his head. "I don't see a cart. No basket. Just walking around holding things, huh? Not planning to pay?" Nancy took a steady breath. She had experienced moments like this before, where she had to be extra careful with her words, where she had to prove she wasn't doing anything wrong. "I only needed a couple of things," she explained. "I'm heading to the checkout after this." Henry wasn't convinced. He had already made up his mind. "Sure, that's what they all say. I know you're kind." Nancy felt a flicker of frustration but kept her expression neutral. "Officer, I assure you, I have every intention of paying. If you'd like, I can go to the checkout right now, and you can watch me pay." Henry smirked. "I don't need your excuses. Hand over what you're holding." He reached out as if to snatch the items from her hands. Nancy took a step back, raising her hands slightly in a defensive posture. "There's no need for this," she said firmly. "I'm just buying food for my family." Henry's face hardened. "Maybe you didn't hear me. I said, hand it over." His voice was louder now, drawing the attention of other shoppers nearby. Nancy glanced around. People were whispering, staring. She felt the weight of their eyes, the silent judgment. A Walmart employee approached, sensing the tension. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, looking between Nancy and Henry. Henry barely acknowledged him. "We're fine. Just dealing with a potential shoplifter," he said. The employee frowned. "Are you sure? She's a regular here. Never had any issues with her before." Henry shot him a sharp look. "I know what I'm doing." Nancy exhaled slowly. She could see where this was going, and she knew she had a choice. She could argue, resist, and escalate the situation, or she could play it smart. "If you're so sure, then let's check the security cameras," she said, her voice steady. Henry hesitated for a fraction of a second before scoffing. Fine. Let's go. They walked to the back of the store, where the security office was located. A small crowd had gathered near the front, watching with curiosity and concern. Inside the security room, the store's cameras replayed the footage. It showed Nancy moving through the aisles, picking up items, browsing, and carrying them in her hands. Nothing suspicious, nothing sneaky. She had done exactly what she said she had. Nancy pointed at the screen. See? I was just shopping. Carlos, the security guard, glanced at Henry. Officer, it looks like she was telling the truth. Henry's face reddened. He looked away from the screen, unwilling to admit he had been wrong. That doesn't prove anything, he muttered. Maybe she was just good at hiding things. Nancy sighed. Enough was enough. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small badge. Officer Winters, she said, her voice cool and controlled, I think it's time you understand something. She held up the badge. Sheriff Nancy Westlake. Maplewood Sheriff's Department. Henry's eyes widened. He stared at the badge, realization dawning like a slap to the face. He had just accused a fellow officer, one who outranked him, of theft. Carlos' jaw dropped. Oh, wow. Sheriff Westlake, I'm so sorry, he stammered. Nancy offered him a small, understanding nod. It's all right, Carlos. You were just doing your job. Then she turned back to Henry. But Officer Winters? You weren't. Henry swallowed hard. I didn't know. That's the problem, Nancy said sharply. You didn't take the time to know. You assumed. And that assumption led to an unnecessary confrontation. This isn't just about me. This is about how you approach your job, how quick you are to judge. Henry had no response. His confidence had crumbled. Later that week, Henry sat across from his supervisor at the precinct. The footage had spread quickly, and Sheriff Westlake had filed a formal complaint. Officer Winters, his supervisor said, his voice cold, your actions were reckless and unprofessional. Effective immediately, you're suspended without pay, pending investigation. Henry felt the weight of those words sink in. His career, his reputation, had just taken a hit he might never recover from. Meanwhile, Sheriff Nancy Westlake received a letter from Carlos, thanking her for standing up for herself and others. The incident sparked conversations in the community about bias, accountability, and fairness. For Henry Winters, this was a lesson he would never forget. For Nancy Westlake, it was a quiet victory, one that reminded her that sometimes, the most powerful way to fight injustice is simply by standing firm in the truth.